Hey, folks, good evening and welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. Thanks for joining me. And I want to welcome all new members to the channel, as well as first-timers in the chat. Now, I'm going to start off tonight's show with an account that was forwarded to me by a colleague who was contacted by the witness. They state, I was traveling solo around the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, making various stops in Olympic National Park. I decided to stop in Quinault for the first time and took a random road that dead-ended at a beautiful spot on the edge of the Quinault River. There was an ancient footbridge that led across the river, but it looked like it might collapse if I tried to cross it, so I decided not to. It was all season, and I was not in a tourist area. I was the only one there. It was so unusually hot outside that I decided that I needed to get in that water. So I backed my car all the way to the edge of the dead-end road, faced it out into the direction I'd need to leave, and started hiking through the thick brush down an embankment to the edge of the water. Now, it was mid-fall, and I didn't have a suit since I didn't plan on going swimming, so I just took my clothes off and got in the water in my bra and underwear. I had a nice swim, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched even though I was in the middle of nowhere. So after about 5 minutes, the creepy feeling was enough for me to want to turn wanted to head back, so I started to climb out. I turned my back to the other side of the river and walked towards my clothes and shoes that I had left behind. When I turned around, there was a big, tall man standing in plain view just across from me on the other side of the river, but higher up on his embankment than I was on mine. He was wearing a poncho made of animal pelts, had long hair full of sticks and twigs, and looked like he'd been living out in the wild for a very long time. We stood and stared at each other, me in a frozen terror, for what felt like forever, when suddenly he frantically took off in the direction of the footbridge leading across the water. I grabbed my car key and tried to grab my clothes and shoes, but they got tangled up in some blackberry vines, so I left everything and went running for my life through the thick brush and blackberries, barefoot in my underwear, trying to make it to my car before he made it across the river. There was no doubt in my mind that he was trying to harm me. When I made it out of the blackberries, I could see he was crossing the bridge towards me rapidly. I got to my car and flung my door open just as he arrived. I locked the doors while he pounded on the hood of my car, just screaming and grunting non-verbally. The moment he went for my driver's side door, I hit the gas and took off as fast as I could. I looked back and he was chasing after me. He must have run after my car for at least a mile until he faded from view. I was bleeding everywhere from running nearly naked through the blackberries. I was wet, unclothed, shaking, and crying. Had I hesitated for literally 10 seconds longer, I don't think I would have made it out of there alive. Even typing this story out again all these years later, I'm still starting to shake. I felt like I was being hunted. Is the only way I can describe that. I will never, ever go back to that area. Since that moment, I always bring a hiking buddy with me when I venture out into the forest. That day is going to haunt me for my life. I have had many years of therapy, and that experience is still vivid as the day it happened. Well, that's not the only strange account I got. So just sit back and relax, and let's get started.
We live in a reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
So before I go any further, I want to mention that this channel is made possible by you clicking on the subscribe and like buttons and by you sharing our programming. Super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated. You can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. The Buy Me a Coffee link is also shown below, and thanks for your consideration. Your comments are always welcome. Tell me which accounts you found interesting in the presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. I want to thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Thomas, and Mike, for their commitment to me and the channel. Thanks. Now, if you're in the chat and have a question, please use all caps. I'll try to get to each one after the presentation. So the term feral people refers to those who have been isolated from human contact, usually from a young age. Now, these individuals may have had minimal experience with humans, human care or language or social behaviors. They may also have suffered abuse or trauma before being abandoned or running away. Feral people are sometimes portrayed as having been raised by animals. But is this phenomena more than a legend? Are there larger populations of these hominins living in isolated areas? Have they developed characteristics that make them less human? Are these individuals the wild men described in folklore and long-told stories? I'll examine several reports that I have received over the years so that you can develop your rationale for their existence. Now, I'm going to start off with 3 different accounts describing what some have called the tree people of the Shenandoah Valley. Who or what are they? Is it just a legend, or are there clans of tree-dwelling feral people? Well, listen and let me know what you think. The first witness states, I had this old man telling me this story about the tree people in Shenandoah Valley and described them as long, lanky humanoids made of roots and moss and other foliage that secrete a sweet and acrid-smelling sappy substance. He said they can climb into things through their mouths and puppet them after consuming their souls, that they only possess things to feed on other things. He said he swears that he and his buddy went out hunting one summer when he was like 19, and they saw this deer chewing just above the grass, not actually eating anything, just chewing on air. And that the eye that it could see was looking directly at them in their blind a little way off. The eye was unnatural for a deer, mostly white with a ring of very pale blue and a dark pupil. The other hunter was freaked out a little and wanted to leave, so they packed up, but when they exited the blind, the deer was closer, just chewing and staring. He said the other hunter couldn't stop staring at the thing, and he wasn't running, so he approached it. So when the hunter got close enough to touch it, a long, sticky black arm slowly stretched out of the deer's mouth and started caressing the guy's face. The dude who told me the story said that the other hunter hit the ground after being touched and started convulsing, while the thing kept climbing out of the deer and touching the guy. He said he shot at the deer like 2 or 3 times and it ran off, and he got his buddy to the hospital. He ended up not remembering anything. The doctor said he had some freak seizures. So I don't know what to make of that count, but I received other accounts referencing these different types of people out of the Shenandoah Valley. In fact, there was one, which I'm going to mention now, where they were called the Shenandoah Free People. He states, my friend in this story and I are still friends to this day. He grew up in the mountains living off the land in Grayson County, Virginia. Now, he and his family are recognized as member as the Pamunkey Native American Nation. Once I had a not deer encounter in the woods in his backyard. He explained to me that it was a manifestation of a forest spirit like what the Slavs called a leshy. It's amazing the things this man knows about, really. He's just a wealth of knowledge and a great human being. So we were working construction on the outskirts of Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is in the Shenandoah Valley. When the weekend came, we decided to go stop by his cousin Lee's land way out in the mountains, several winding dirt roads off Highway 33. Now, let me tell you, cousin Lee's got an old school mountain cabin still heated by a wood-burning stove. Also, cousin Lee, very simple because of the childhood head trauma. He is by no means dumb, but just like Sling Blade simple. So, we were over there having a good time, growing some deer he shot inside the mountain, and noticed padlocks in what appeared to be refuse bins. Of course, I inquired, and the response I got was, they will dig in my trash and throw it everywhere if I don't lock it. Well, cousin Lee burned what he could and took the remains to the dump, a very common practice in the area. So I'm assuming he's talking about raccoons and the man is simple, so, he was just being a little overdramatic. We went in to eat and no one put the lock back on the refuse bin, which had the remainder of the deer carcass in it. Dinner went by without a hitch, and after cleaning up, we decided to sit down and smoke some mountain grass. Now, we were smoking out, no alcohol, and having a good time playing old records of bands like Led Zeppelin and others, when suddenly we heard a loud thud on the roof, followed by 2 quick steps and then silence. I have no idea what just happened. I just know I'm scared, and cousin Lee exclaims, "It's them. They better not be in my trash," and goes into his room and comes out with a shotgun. My friend, and we'll call him Jay, grabs these 2 handcrafted walking sticks out of the corner. I'm still oblivious, but my friend Jay and his cousin Lee are headed to the back door like, it's some type of routine. I then witnessed Jay bust out the door first with 2 big sticks, waving them in the air while making just strange growl-like noises. After Jay gets about 10 feet out the door, out comes Lee with the shotgun. But he's waving it above his head, making the same crazy growling noises. Now, at this point, I'm just too curious about the situation and head for the door. When I got to the door, the pungent odor of bear feces. I poke my head out the door and I see this hairy man dressed in tattered rags and caked with mud trying to gather the deer parts in the refuse bin. I look up and there's another one on top of the shed. But he's perched almost like a gargoyle wearing only what appears to be a tattered vest. I'm drowning in awe of the situation. My mind is unable to fully process what's going on. I let out a scream. This seemed to upset the trash digger, and he started banging a piece of deer he had in his hand on the side of the refuse bin. Now, cousin Lee took his shotgun down and fired off a shot, and they took off. What was really horrifying was apparently there was one on the roof behind all our backs. I saw it coming overhead, and it landed on the shed the other one had been on, and then in a single bound leaped into a tree. He successfully ran off with a piece of deer as well. Now, here comes the real crazy part of the explanation. Cousin Lee says, you never want to shoot one. They have got a mighty big clan, and they all come if you get one of their own. Warning shot always scares them off. I just bust out, what was that? Response was, the tree people. Apparently, people have gone into the forest and lived and survived and ended up clanning up with others living in the woods. This has been going on for a long time. They have lived for several generations in the wilderness as fair people. apparently they steal clothing, line, tools, anything they can get their hands on. They also enjoy messing with people. Oh, and apparently they live in the trees, thus why they're called locally as the tree people. So if that wasn't enough, I got another account that I received in 2021 from the West Virginia mountains. Now, a woman from Gary, West Virginia, describes her encounter with a clan of fair people on her property. The descriptions are dirty, barefoot, hairy, mutated humans that can leap through the trees. Now, she states, I live in West Virginia and have all my life. I don't come from a rich family. I'm not rich myself. I live in a small single wide trailer with my 2-year-old son outside of the town of Gary in McDowell County. My boyfriend is a truck driver and is only home ever so often. I'm kind of used to being alone with my son here at night. My closest neighbor is 3 miles away and my trailer is back in the woods. This is a mountain town. I grew up hearing scary stories of monsters, but I never saw anything growing up. I never saw anything until now, and I want to tell you about it. What people are talking about is most definitely what is stalking us here, because I know it's not a Sasquatch. I never saw a Sasquatch, but I think I know if I would ever see one. So this just started last summer. I clean houses for a living, and I was leaving the last house of the day and had to go pick up my son from the babysitters, and we headed back home. It was 8 o'clock exactly when we turned into the driveway. Now, my driveway is very long and surrounded by trees and the woods on both sides. I hadn't even gotten to my house when I saw a man jump from one tree on the right side of the driveway to a tree on the left side of the driveway. I mean, like 30 feet in the air. He just jumped like how a monkey swings from a tree. He did this in front of the car as I was still driving slowly to get to the trailer. It's bumpy sand on the driveway, so I never go more than 10 miles an hour down it. At that moment, I wasn't sure what I saw, but I did know it was a man. I saw his skin, and it had some torn clothes on it too. Arms, legs, all that man would have. Did not see his face. I hit the brakes. My son's still in the back seat, almost asleep. Now, I didn't question what I saw or try to make sense of it because I knew it was some creature. Yeah, I was scared. My first thought was my son. I only stopped there in my driveway for a second, and then I went ahead and sped up to go on and down the driveway so I could get to the house with my son. I'm passing those trees to my left, and I'm just looking around to see if they're there. I don't see anything. I just keep on going. It's dark, but I can still see. So I see my trailer around the corner up ahead, and I see movement. Okay, so let me add here that it's not that common for deer and other animals to be around the trailer. That's normal. But there were people up ahead, and one of them was in my trash bag. I don't have trash service way out here, so I sometimes will leave a bag of trash on the porch and haul it myself to the dump. So a man and was all in my trash. I got closer, and these people hear my car, and my headlights are lighting up the front area of the house. And I see 4 of them things running off into the woods. I saw one of them well, but it was his face that really got me scared. That thing had dirt or mud all over his face, and there was something wrong with his face because it just didn't look right to me. His eyes were way up on his forehead, and he had a humped back. He had some dark pants on, but no shirt, and the chest and back had a lot of brown hair. He was barefoot. This was the one digging in my trash bag. He ran off too, but he didn't seem to be in such a rush as the other ones were to get back into the woods. I lost sight of them all, and I waited before I went any further because of my son. I didn't have a gun or anything with me, so I was careful. I sat in my car for 20 minutes running idle before I drove on up to the house. I grabbed my son and we ran inside because no cell signal down my driveway. I called my uncle as soon as I got inside. My uncle said I was seeing weird stuff, but he came out there an hour later and looked around. Lord, I was so scared while I and my son sat there waiting for my uncle. My uncle got here. He's a big guy and has weapons with him. He investigated. He came back to the front door white as a ghost. He came in and said that he had seen the devil in those woods, and they were getting in his truck with my son and were getting the hell out of here. We never called the police or anything. What are you going to tell the police? Well, that was last summer. So winter came and nothing. Then just this past March, when my boyfriend was home, we heard scratching at 11 o'clock at night on the side of the trailer. A metal sound. He went outside to look, but there wasn't anything there. But he smelled an odor that he described as rotten pig feet. If you eat pig feet, then you know what I mean. We smell bad things a lot, and we see things moving in the trees. But now my boyfriend will be moving us to another state because of his job, and we only have a few weeks here anyway, so there's some about the wild clans in the West Virginia mountains. So this next account, a Virginia woman is hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains when she observes a cave opening on a mountainside. She climbs up the face to explore the opening. She soon regrets her decision. I traveled about an hour from my home in Lynchburg, Virginia to do some exploring in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I'm not big on hiking or whatever, but I had recently gone through a breakup with my boyfriend. I just needed some fresh air and some time alone. I parked and just started wandering. I didn't follow a specific path. I was mesmerized by the giant trees, the fauna, the wildlife. I was really enjoying myself. I'd been hiking for about 2 hours when I saw this large hole on a nearby mountainside. It wasn't too far, seemed like it was just a manageable climb. So I climbed up, and when I got to the grotto, I stuck my head in, and it was dark. I turned on my phone's flashlight, and that's when I realized this was a deep cave. I got a little carried away thinking about how I had discovered a cave, wondering if anyone else had ever been up here. It was sort of exciting. I ducked down and I walked in. I went a few feet. I was very careful, but I could see a smooth rock floor beneath me. I felt safe, so I continued walking forward, following the light from my flashlight. It was maybe 15 or 20 feet in when I realized I was in a cavern. There were a few openings in the walls surrounding the cavern. I picked the closest one to me and I looked in. It was another tunnel. It was big enough to walk through, so I stepped through the opening and I carefully walked a few more feet. That's when I heard scampering. I stopped walking, thinking maybe I'd kicked something. I looked all around, but I saw nothing. I then heard the scampering again, and when I raised my phone up to look ahead of me, I saw a person. Only like not a regular person, but a humanoid. It was fully nude, and it looked very malnourished. It was crouched down on its hands and feet about 4 feet in front of me. It was so pale, like maybe it had never been out in the sun. Its face was sunken in, and I could clearly see the cheekbones. It had totally black eyes, not just the pupils, but all black. Between its hands was half-eaten rabbit. I heard the chattering sound, and then I realized this was the humanoid making the noise. I don't know how I knew, but it was calling out to the others. I moved back toward the entrance, but I kept my flashlight on it. It seemed fearful of light and didn't try to move towards me. I was able to get back through the entrance, and I looked around. I didn't see anything else. I then ran for my light back the way I came, and I could hear the chattering, and it was getting closer and louder. There had to be more than just one. I felt like I was being hunted. I was able to see the light from the original opening. I tripped. I quickly got up and rushed out of that hole. I ran and slid down the mountain. I only stopped when I was sure nothing had been following me. Then I realized I had no phone. I must have lost it when I tripped. I had no idea where it was, but I was just happy to be alive. Now, I did eventually find a trail and I managed to make it back to my car. I found the local police station, but it was pointless because they wouldn't take me seriously. So I just drove home. I cried so much on that drive, and when I got home, I checked my phone's location with the satellite feature. All I could see was heavily wooded area. Now, the last time I checked the location of my phone, it had moved several miles away from its original location. Now, I'm sure the battery had long since run out. I had done a bit of research online and found references to crawler humanoids, but I'm just wondering if this was a feral human of some kind. Regardless, I'm not going back to that area. Now, this may sound far-fetched to some readers, but I have to, I've heard and read similar accounts over the years now. Having corresponded with the witness, I'm just not sure what she encountered. The location, from what I could determine, was Montgomery County, which is south of Lafayette, Virginia. I don't necessarily believe that was a crawler humanoid as well, since its reactions, demeanor were different than most of the accounts I've heard or previously been told. Was it a feral human? Possibly, I guess. So, various media sources had been reporting strange sightings of a mysterious wolf man that had been stalking the woods in Harz National Park in Germany. Was it a feral human or just a view of the past? Reports of an unkempt man carrying a spear in a German forest stoked speculation that legends of a wolf man stalking the woods in the Harz region were true. Now, there had been 2 photos captured by hikers that showed a naked and shaggy man sitting on a rock holding a long stick in his left hand and scratching rock with another instrument in his right hand. Gina Weiss and her friend Toby claimed to have taken pictures on their mobile phones while walking beneath a set of sandstone caves in Harz National Park just previous to that. Now, she told the paper, "We saw the wolfman when we reached the sandstone caves. He was standing on top of one of the caves holding a long wooden stick like a spear in his arm. He didn't take his eyes off of us, and he didn't say a word," she recounted. She said the encounter lasted about 10 minutes. He looked dirty and behaved like a Stone Age man from a history book. Now, according to the media, there have been intermittent sightings of that man since 2015, with local authorities claiming to have found evidence that someone was starting fires and building rudimentary dwellings in the forest. However, one volunteer with the local fire service told the paper that they had not noticed anything unusual in the forest, describing the story as nonsense and speculating that the photos were a prank. Now, with a third of Germany's landmass covered by dense forests, stories of hermits living off the land occasionally crop up in the local media. In 2007, a U.S. citizen was found living in a hut in the depths of the Eifel, a low mountain range in western Germany, that had cultivated a small marijuana plantation. Modern legends attached to the woods, which inspire many of the popular fairy tales by the German brothers Grimm, loom large in the public imagination. Now, there were also some reports of a lion prowling the forest outside Berlin, which gained significant attention for many days, only for the beast to have been a wild boar. And authorities in the wealthy suburb told people to stay in their home after they claimed to have video evidence showing the rear end of the lions. So after helicopters and drones scoured the scene without success, local authorities were forced to concede that the case was probably mistaken identity. Now, the only reason I mentioned that was that, we get a lot of these, especially in Germany and Poland and a few of the Eastern Bloc countries, the Eastern countries in Europe, of these wild men. I think a lot of it goes back to the old werewolf legends for the most part. But of course, when, years ago, centuries ago, when these people came to the New World, they brought a lot of that legend with them. And maybe that's the next, a lot of the wild man tales we get here in the United States, but you never know. Now, this next account, which I thought was interesting, was when U.S. troops on patrol in Vietnam reported a strange, not quite human, but not quite ape creature, and the locals called the Ngoy Rung, or people of the forest. Now Gary Linder was on a 6-man patrol with the 101st Airborne Long-Range Reconnaissance Patrols. Now, while struggling through the underbrush, he ran into deep-set eyes on a prominent brow, 5 feet tall with long muscular arms. The creature walked upright with broad shoulders and a heavy torso. His battle buddies told him he just saw a rock ape, but Linder said he's seen rock apes before. This was no rock ape. Now, for those who don't know what a rock ape is, it's like a smaller version of a Bigfoot. And you find a lot of stories coming out of Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia of these rock apes, these small ape-like creatures that look a bit human. Now, like the Yeti in the Himalayas and the Sasquatch sightings all over North America, the Ngoy Rung is an oft-told tale in the area. But despite endless sightings and folklore attached to these semi-mythical creature, no concrete evidence exists. Now, Linder wasn't the only witness either. An Army Sergeant, Thomas Jenkins, reported his platoon was attacked by these apes throwing stones. So toward the end of the war, the Viet Cong and the NVA soldiers reported so many sightings of the reddish-brown hair-covered Ngoy Rung. The North Vietnamese Communist Party Secretariat ordered scientists to investigate. Now, a respected ornithologist and environmental researchers from Hanoi discovered the Ngoy Rung footprint on the forest floor and made a cast of it. Now, the cast was wider than a human foot, but too big for an ape. So in 1982, another Vietnamese scientist discovered more footprints, which led to zoologist John McKinnon to investigate the region. Now, McKinnon called the area a tiny, pristine corner of the world unknown to modern science. So in 1969, McKinnon discovered man-like footprints in Borneo's jungle, which the locals called a batatut. Now, while much of the evidence surrounding the evidence of these apes is anecdotal, McKinnon, known for his discovery of a new mammal species in Vietnam, believes there's a possibility of existence of these previously unknown apes and that they're possibly real. So I got an older account here, which is pretty interesting. Let's see what you think about it. So did the people living around the Florida Panhandle swamp capture a Bigfoot back in 1884? Now, the evidence indicates that they did. The Cheesy Pond is a swampy lake near Sneads and Grand Ridge in Jackson County, Florida. It is more than just 3 miles long and nearly the same distance wide. In 1884, something very strange happened there, according to local lore and the New York Times. A mysterious creature began causing problems for local people living around the Cheesy Pond in Shady Grove community. The story is that they saw this thing but couldn't tell what it was. It was raiding their gardens at night and stealing their chickens. Now, the people of the Cheesy Pond area were tough people living in a tough time. Many of them were former Confederate soldiers. They decided to go out and find this thing and see what it was, so they organized a search posse. They armed themselves and then went into the swamps. They eventually caught the Cheesy Pond wild man. News of the capture was carried by the Apalachicola and the Chattahoochee River by the steamboat Amos Hayes. A correspondent from the New York Times heard the story in Columbus, Georgia, and shared it with his readers. Now, the description that appeared in the New York Times indicated that he was emaciated and covered with thin hair from head to toe. He couldn't speak and is unintelligible. They said that they didn't know what they had found. He was later taken to nearby Chattahoochee, Florida, in the belief that he might be some type of escaped mental patient. He was eventually placed in the Florida State Asylum for the insane. He apparently died there a couple of years later. Now, the legend still lives on around the Cheesy Pond and the mysterious creature captured that day. Now, some even believe that his descendants still roam those swamps, and the sightings of similar creatures do continue to this day. So here's another account that I received, where two brothers had been fly fishing on the Holy Cross Wilderness in Colorado when something or someone started to throw rocks at them from above. Now, the witness states, I live in Colorado and like to spend my weekends in the mountains, fly fishing, hiking, camping, etc. I'm in my early 20s, so young, I suppose, but I like to think that I'm generally comfortable in the mountains. And I've seen quite a bit of what this state has to offer. Now, my older brother is like me, but even more experienced in the mountain wilderness. And yesterday, he and I decided to go fishing at a favorite hole of ours in the Holy Cross Wilderness. Now, this area is well trafficked, especially now as the aspens are changing and lots of tourists come to see them. Bluebird skies, warmish weather, and he and I were just getting in the water when we first felt something was a bit off. Late morning at this point. Most people like to fish early in the morning, but this hole is blocked from the sun by a cliff face, and the fish don't usually start biting until closer to noon. Now, again, this is a favorite hole of ours, because despite the area having lots of hikers and day trippers, this part of the creek we're on takes some know-how and effort to hike to. So we're about half a mile away from where we park and no one else is around. Now, the first thing I noticed is very little wildlife ambience or background noise after we set up our rods and got into the water. Now, as I'm wading in, I hear rocks above us on the cliff move and a couple fall in the water not more than 50 feet from us. That's odd. In my probably 15, 20 times at this spot, I never witnessed the cliff fall apart as, it appeared to have done. Now, besides the sound of the creek we're standing in, it's definitely quiet, and the sound of the rocks falling and hitting the water made us both leap a bit. Now, my brother turns around, and we both look at the cliff face. Now, there's a ledge above the tree, above with trees, and I'd never given it any thought before, but I realized then and there, I felt like someone not only could be up there on the ledge, but my gut tells me something's there. Now, my brother, I can tell, seemed to be contemplating things as well. He literally turned to me in a minute after the rock fall and said, "Okay, that was weird, right?" I tell him, "Yeah," and then hesitantly told him, "Hey, it's quiet out today." Almost on cue, a rock lands in the water, and this time it's between us. I'm not kidding. We're near the cliff face, but not near enough for the rock to just fall off and land between us. Now, this rock had been propelled. We looked up and we saw it. A person holding a rock in their hand, naked as all get out, with long brown hair. And as we were looking at him, it looked like he grinned and threw the rock at us from above. It got close to hitting my brother, and immediately we're like, "What the hell?" And quickly waded back on the other side of the creek. Now, my brother slipped, and the person must have thrown another rock at him, because I heard a big kerplunk, and my brother is yelling bloody murder. I got on the bank and grabbed a rock in my hand and turned to throw it back at the person on the cliff. They're no longer there. Now, keeping my eyes on the cliff ledge, I offer my hand to my brother as he's now soaked, and I pulled him up onto the bank. He's upset, saying he'll get his gun from his car and shoot the guy and say that saying he could have been killed. Now, we're both on the bank looking up and expecting rocks to come flying, and sure enough, they do. But we can't see who's throwing them. But there are golf ball to football-sized rocks being tossed down one at a time. Now, from memory, I count a total of 7 rocks thrown at us from the initial rock slide. My brother throws a rock over the ledge, but I tell him we should move. So we weave through the river willows, looking back over the foliage to keep an eye on the ledge, and then we hear it, a howl, blood-curdling scream from that direction. I don't see the being, but it had to have been making the noise. We got back in the car and both started recollecting what we both had experienced. We both figured it must have been some deranged homeless person or something, but it was not until I told my girlfriend when we got home last night that she had told me about the feral people she hears about on TikTok. I guess homeless psychos is the same thing as these feral people, right? Or is there a distinct difference? Now, none of us were hit by rocks, although my brother says the one that I didn't see land was so close it splashed him and its wife fell in the water. Now, I should note we drove to the National Park Ranger office and filed a report under my brother's name. He was told he'd be given a call today or early this week with any follow-up or questions they may need answered. Craziest encounter I ever experienced while out in the mountains. We're both already saying we may never go back to the hole again, and I already told a couple buddies of mine that know the spot about what happened there. So we got another account. I got another account here from Olympic National Forest from a camper hiker who encountered what he said to be an unusual man crouching in the dark tree line. Now, he tells me, I was hiking in the Olympic National Forest a few years ago by myself and my 2 dogs. We were 4 days in, around 20 miles at least as a crow flies from even a known mountain road. I was camping at around 7 7K feet that night, or right where the tree line started thinning out. So when we got to the campsite in the big open meadow on top of the secondary mountain, it was about an hour from sunset. So my big dog usually runs around within the proximity of the camp as I put the tent up, make dinner, etc. But I noticed this time was a little different. He kept staring up this steep tree up on the mountainside, tail straight out and barking. Now, the bark when he barks when he sees marmots. Not the excited barks, but unsure, concerned barks. Now, the day before I had found a note left under a rock at the last landmark saying that there was a problem bear in the area that was harassing a party of campers a few days ago. And I had seen big cat tracks the day before, so I was rightfully concerned that this may be more than just ground squirrels. So I decided to go climb some of the boulders at the foot of the hill, while I took my time looking up the hillside for movement. I went to hang my bear bag up there. They were the only trees around to hang the bag. I didn't see or hear anything, but my dog kept quietly whining like there was something up there. So while still concerned, I started hiking up the steep hill to hang the bag. Now, it was so steep I had to use the trees to balance and lean against so I didn't go tumbling down before making another 5-6 step push to the next tree I could lean against. Anyway, I'm slowly making it up the hill, hopping from tree to tree to keep my balance. Then I get about 100 feet up the hill and I hear a whole lot of big movements about 50 feet in front of me. Now, my dog immediately goes from a deep low growl to a savage slobber flying everywhere type barking now. My heart starts pounding out of my chest and I start to panic. A million thoughts go racing through my head in a matter of seconds, because if this is a bear, my dog is going to try to save me, in which he will most likely die. And then I'm stuck here. If I must get off that hillside fast, almost 100%, I'm going to trip and fall off a 12 to 15 foot cliff onto the boulders below. So I'm feeling screwed about this time. Then I heard the other little dog still barking and freaking out down at my campsite, which was just out of sight. I had zipped her in my tent so she didn't wander off while I was away. So yeah, I'm absolutely panicking at this point. A few seconds after I kind of snapped out of it, I take another few seconds to start to put my survival priorities in order and call my dog back to me. The dog's name is Loki. He comes and sits against my feet as my back is up against a tree, so I'm kind of stuck there for the moment. But my dog was seemingly trying to separate me from something up there, so I let him lean against me while I tried to collect myself. Now, this is when I realized I had completely forgotten that I was wearing my headlamp. I reached up so fast to turn on my lamp, I basically punched myself in the face. I'm having some serious adrenaline dumps going on at this point, and so much so that my knees start to shake. So I get my lamp on and I peer up the hillside. I figure I'll at least get a reflection of eyes or whatever's up there. I'm peering further, but nothing. But I had just heard something. We both did. And whatever it was, it didn't get away or sound like it made too far. I knew something was up there, so I'm kind of just steadfast at the point. I need to know what is up there because I must sleep here tonight. You know, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, alone. Better to face it than wait like a sitting duck all night. That's in my thought process. So yeah, as I'm looking up the hill, and at one point my dog lunges forward, unpinning me. He does a bluff charge up the hill about 15 feet, and I mean, he's snarling and foaming at the mouth at this point. As he does this, I finally see movement. Something moving up and breaking the line of the horizon or sunset. My dog's bluff made whatever it was blow its cover. So I'm zeroed in. I call my dog back and silently watch. And what I make out made my heart completely drop. There was a man crouched about 75 feet directly in front of me, wearing not camo clothes, but some raggedy something with a hood that blended into the environment perfectly, almost like a makeshift ghillie suit, with his face exposed. Now, I couldn't see his eyes, and his face was covered in dirt or something, but I knew we were staring right at each other at this moment. So I stare for what seems like minutes. No words. I felt like I was trying to subconsciously convey that I was going to stand my ground. I wanted him to know I saw him, but I guess it was just too shaken to speak. Now, as I'm staring, my little dog back at the campsite start to bark her head off again like she was scared. And also had to get off that hill before total dark, or I could be seriously hurt or risk dying trying to get back down. So carefully, I started heading down the hill with my dog. He doesn't want to leave, but listens. Periodically, I'd stop with my back against the tree holding me up and look in the direction again just to make it even more clear that I saw it. And eventually, I make it down to the boulders at the bottom. Now, by that time, I finally jumped down and hit the boulders. My little dog had stopped barking. I could only see the top of my tent from the bottom of the boulders. I think she was barking just to bark. Dachshunds will do that, or just barking back at my dog. But when I got there, my little dog had somehow gotten out of the tent and was walking around the camp growling with her tail sticking straight out. Still trying to hold it together, I thought, okay, maybe she just got her nose between the zipper and worked her way out. But I was positive I had zipped it up and, the whole way up to the top of the tent door, out of reach. So in a mixture of being terrified, pissed off, and feeling of needing to do something, I reached into my day bag and pulled out my .40 Magnum. I fired a single shot into the air as the sun was setting, climbed into my tent without eating, and lay with my gun next to me until first light. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my stuff and leaving, heading back down the mountain. It sucks. It was all downhill back, but it still couldn't cover the ground to get back to my car in one day. It was dark by the time, and I made it to the last camp about 4 miles from my vehicle. But thankfully, there were other people there. We sat around the fire they made, and I felt relieved and safe. They start to tell me that they're planning to head in the way where I had been the night before. So I tell them my story in detail. We were both walking back to our cars in the morning. Screw all that. The thing that still creeps me out until this day, though, is when I got home and started reading reviews of the same hike I was on, other people had had similar experiences to mine as well. Even a man was found dead from a fall around the same boulder range 2 years ago, and a woman found murdered there 2 years after that. So, folks, that's it. So if you've got any questions, go ahead and put them up, and I'll get to them. Okay, let's see here. Dust Bunny. Has anyone claimed to have been captured by then escaped from these beings? I know there's got to be some. I don't know offhand of any, but I know there's got to be some. You know, when you think about these things, first of all, you got to think, well, was it some type of mistaken identity? Was it just not a feral person or some type of murder out there? You know, we live not far from the Appalachian Trail, and, you know, there have been murders all up and down the Appalachian Trail from just sick people. But as far as these feral people go, you know, I can't really recall anything about anyone saying they were captured by one and got away. Of course, all up and down the Appalachians, people have gone missing. So maybe they got caught and couldn't get away. I don't know. Alexis Chastain. I think the feral humans are a cross between human and an animal. Maybe they're hybrids. You know, every time I read these stories that come from people, I always think about, you know, mountain people that are just a lot different than most people in society. And, you know, being alone like that and fending for themselves for the most part can probably change their impression of regular folks, but I don't know. You know, you know, we hear every once in a while I get something like this. I hear other stories from other people as well. And you know, a lot of it does come out of West Virginia and Virginia. I don't hear a whole lot any other places up and down the Appalachian Mountains, but Virginia and West Virginia seem to have most of the sighting reports of these things. So is there a population of these beings? I really don't know. Now, I don't know what they really are. You know, we've been hearing these wild man stories for years, but for the most part, I think most of the wild man stories are actually Bigfoot. Of course, 100 years ago, even though we've had reports of wild men during the Civil War, actually. And they didn't really know what they were. The first thing they thought was it was some type of, you know, just they call wild man. They didn't know anything about Bigfoot or some type of other primate. So it's hard to tell what people saw, you know, or what the deal is with these things. But we still get reports, and we get a fair amount of them. Let's see. Kerfurt. I live in western North Dakota. We saw a beast running in a ditch, possibly a dog man, and we also saw the motionless flying humanoid that looked like an orangutan glide into a tree. Any similar reports? Have you been reading my blog? Because I've got all kinds of reports like that. Yeah, we get a lot of reports like that. If you want to write it down and go into detail, feel free to send it to me. Just send it to my email, Lon Strickler at phantomsmonsters.com. But, you know, these flying humanoid things, and of course, Dogman or cryptid canines, you know, that's what we do. We get a lot of those reports, and we do a lot of investigations of these things. Cansquatch. Are the reports of wild men in the 1800s feral humans? I don't know. I mean, it could be Bigfoot. Honestly, you know, it just seemed that was a time when people just didn't know what they were doing. Of course, the people are out west in particular, but then again, you know, out west was much further east than what it is now. And there was a lot of different things being cited back then. So I do want to thank Robo1776 for his, for their donation of $9.99. He asked, so feral people exhibit paranormal behaviors? I guess they do. I mean, I don't know what you consider paranormal as far as jumping around in trees 30 feet across a driveway. Is that paranormal? I don't know. I have heard some reports of some strange activity that's not really explained. Just like the first account where I talked about the guy who's saying that he saw a hand coming out of this thing's mouth or whatever. I don't know what that was all about. Is it something similar to what happens with the knot deer and some other creatures that we just can't explain? It very well could be. Oh, I want to thank Lala Bright for her super stickers, much appreciated, and Robert Presser for his $1.99. Much appreciate all the donations. What keeps us going. So, short order cook. Maybe a topic could be the creepy stories of the Appalachian Mountains. Yeah, well, there's a lot of them come out of there. I have talked about the Appalachian Trail. A lot of the weird stuff that happens in the Appalachian Trail. I mean, there's stories everywhere. I have talked about a lot of them. What I'll do is I'll go back to the old one I had and make sure I don't repeat myself on other accounts. But we do get a lot of them from the Appalachian Trail in particular. But that trail in the Appalachian Mountains run from actually northern Alabama and up to northern Georgia and the whole way up into Maine. But there's plenty of stories. Dagnammit ask, do you think these feral people are cannibalistic? Yeah, I have heard stories that there's possibly some cannibalism associated with them. I guess like anything else, if you're up in the mountains in the winter or something and there's nothing else to eat and somebody dies, God forbid that they killed somebody just to feed on, but when somebody dies, maybe they will partake in that human flesh. There have been stories of the Old West where that happened many times. So, who knows? I think it could be possible. Hans Quatch, odd people back then associated what they saw with human more than animals. Yeah. Well, that's particularly, they knew nothing, or, just like mountain gorillas. Mountain gorillas weren't really even known until the late 1800s, early 1900s. So if you see something like that up in America, in the United States, you don't know what it is because there's no real explanation as to what it was. And the only thing they associate it with is what they know, and that's humans. So it's a hairy human. They'll call it a wild person, a wild man. Marcus Toledo. One, there's a possibility of runaways, two inbred, and there are possibility they move around several states south in the winter and north in the summer. Or in other words, they migrate. Yeah, that may be. I think that's entirely possible. I think some Bigfoot actually do that as well, especially here in the East Coast. Butch and I looked into a lot of that. That we thought there were some migration routes for Bigfoot, even cryptid canines from central Pennsylvania down along the Blue Ridge in the South Mountains, down in the further Appalachians, down into Southwest Virginia. Could feral people actually, if they're got a big enough clan or help take care of each other, could they do that? Sure. They may follow the food and try to get out of the cold. Short order cook. Dr. Simeon Hine did a talk recently about a blue mist which had been seen when a Bigfoot was around. Do you have any reports on this aspect? I hear of a lot of different things as far as paranormal activity around Bigfoot. Now, Could it be the same thing with feral people? I guess so. But we get a lot of orb sightings, possible portals, and other things associated with Bigfoot sightings. Yeah, it's entirely possible. Robert Presser, thanks for your donation. Now, I've never seen a feral person, Bigfoot in person, but out, and many times I've been in the woods. 2 times I felt like I was being watched in Ohio. Well, yeah, it's entirely possible. You know, we've had reports in Ohio. Ohio's a very active state. You know, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, over into Illinois, up into the upper Midwest. We do get a lot of Bigfoot reports, cryptid canine reports, bipedal reports, and then moving down into the mountains. So, absolutely. Okay, folks. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in tonight, asking questions, and for being in the chat. Always nice to have you around. You know, if you did donate, I really appreciate it. We do have one more here. Dust Bunny, are any of these beings reported as being female? Yeah, occasionally I do get a female one, but it's usually a brief account. They you know, for whatever reason, those that are identified as female, they really don't do much. I think it's almost like pecking order. They stick around where there's around the kids, around the locale where they're living, and you know, and the men are out gathering food and stuff. So yeah, I think that may be a reason why. But yeah, I have had a few, but there's really never that much information about females. Look. Again, everything's appreciated. Your support's what makes all this possible. So please like, subscribe, and share. And please leave comments. If there's anything about the show that you really liked or that you want for me to gather for a show, let me know. And if you had a sighting or encounter report and you'd like to be considered for the show or for the blog, contact me at Lon Strickler, phantomsmonsters.com. So until we meet again, I want to thank you. And, you know, if you do go out in the woods, be careful. That's all I can say. So have a great weekend. I'll talk to you soon.